If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hi, I'm Sadie Carpenter, co-host of the Leaving Eden podcast, and I was raised in a cult. I signed purity pledges. I cried at the altar. I went out door-to-door soul winning, and I didn't own a pair of jeans until I was 20 years old. I saw it all and did it all as I grew up, completely immersed, pun fully intended, in the independent fundamental Baptist movement. With my co-host Gavriel Hakohen, I unpack all of this, from the hilarious to the traumatic, back to the hilarious, on the Leaving Eden podcast. New episodes release every Monday on all podcast streaming platforms. We recommend new listeners start by checking out episode 57, in which we discuss the BITE model and give an overview of my personal story.
Hello listeners, and welcome to this week's mini-series on the troubled teen industry with Meg Applegate. It's hard for me to put into words the overwhelming response that the podcast has received around the troubled teen industry. And yet, every single conversation I have brings more difficult things to light and horrifying details that no child or young adult or person should have to endure. To encapsulate some of that, I have found an article on youthtoday.org that I wanted to read to all of you before getting into my conversation with Meg Applegate. Ellen Ranter Olson published on the Youth Today website on April 5th, 2003, an article titled "The Death of 17-year-old Taylor Goodrich is the latest test for Utah's will to regulate the troubled teen industry." The article goes on to state, in September 2021, 4 months after Utah enacted a new law aimed at tightening restrictions on the state's residential treatment centers that house hundreds of children who parents and state agencies say they can't handle at home, then 16-year-old Taylor Goodrich was sent from her home in Washington state to the desert of southern Utah for what her family thought would be a year-long stay at Diamond Ranch Academy. Located about 30 miles west of Zion National Park, Diamond Ranch Academy has a skate park, basketball court, and football field, and describes itself as America's leading therapeutic boarding school and clinical residential program, providing a first-class, structured, and supportive environment for teenagers struggling with emotional, social, educational, or behavioral issues. A member of the Stillaguamish tribe, Taylor was having emotional difficulties at home and went to her tribe for counseling. Taylor thought it would be a good idea to get into a good boarding school to work on some of these issues. Diamond Ranch Academy holds itself out as an outfit that works for Native American tribes, said Alan Mortensen, Goodrich's attorney. On the internet, it looks like a great place. Less than a year and a half later, on December 20th, 2022, Taylor collapsed on campus and was later declared dead. According to a lawsuit filed by Taylor's father, Dean Goodrich, Taylor was in very good health when she arrived at the Diamond Ranch Academy, but started having severe stomach aches in December 2022. The lawsuit claims that in the weeks leading up to Taylor's death, she had a distended belly, a high fever, and at one point collapsed into her own vomit. Staff at the facility ignored her repeated cries for help, telling her that she was faking it and needed to suck it up, the lawsuit claims. While an official cause of death has yet to be determined, Taylor's family said in a lawsuit that they believe she died of sepsis, a life-threatening condition that occurs when the body's response to an infection damages its own tissues. 2 days after Taylor's death, the state of Utah placed Diamond Ranch Academy on a conditional license, which bars the school from accepting additional children and subjects it to increased monitoring, pending the results of an investigation by the Department of Health and Human Services. On March 17, 2023, a new conditional license was issued for the school, removing the ban on accepting new clients. An attorney for Diamond Ranch Academy, or DRA, said in an email that many allegations in the lawsuit were false, but federal privacy laws prevented the school from responding in detail. A Utah state senator named Mike McKell says, "I think the majority of kids in these programs shouldn't be in programs. If you've got kids with serious mental health issues that are difficult and challenging, there is certainly a role for some facilities, but I think the role of a community, the role of a family, the role of churches cannot be understated, and I think we can do better." The reaction to Taylor's death is the latest test of Utah's efforts to more closely regulate what reform advocates call the troubled teen industry, and marks a potential turning point in national efforts to increase regulation of facilities like Diamond Ranch Academy. In the past 16 years, a series of Government Accountability Office reports have detailed instances of abuse and neglect in residential treatment centres nationally. State investigations have found similar instances of facility staff keeping children isolated for weeks at a time, inflicting pain in order to achieve compliance, and injecting children with antihistamines and sedatives when they misbehaved. Diamond Ranch Academy has been the target of at least 4 lawsuits over the past 11 years that claim students were harmed at the school. This advocacy and activism work that is spoken about in the Youth Today article is some of the most passionate and moving activism work I have seen throughout my 3 years of conducting this podcast. One of the key figures in this movement is Meg Applegate, and I'm truly moved to be able to bring you Meg's story, some of her personal experiences, and what her advocacy work entails. For more information on Meg Applegate and her work, you can check out www.unsilenced.org, or you can visit www.yanyalalich.com or www.tbylr.com for takebackyourliferecovery.com for more information on Meg's work with Dr. Yanya Lalich and the programs of support offered for troubled teen industry survivors through the Take Back Your Life Recovery Foundation. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast, and that was a very long introduction, so for now, here is Meg Applegate. So hello, Meg, and welcome to the show. Thank you for being here to chat with me today about your experiences regarding the troubled teen industry and all of the work that you are doing to change what is happening in the world right now. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Absolutely. My name is Meg Applegate, and I am the CEO of Unsilenced. I'm super excited to be here today. Let's see, I am the co-founder as well. So basically, I am in charge of the overall direction of the organization. I also, right now, because our organization is fairly new, I'm in charge of all fundraising and partnerships and reaching out and things like that to people that we're interested in partnering up with. So it's kind of like a high level strategy, relationship building, that kind of thing.
And for anybody that hasn't heard of Unsilenced before, can you give us a breakdown of the history and the mission statement and all that really, really good stuff?
Absolutely. I would gladly do that. So our mission is to stop institutional child abuse by empowering self-advocates to create lasting social change. And we really became to be because we envision a world where youth are free from institutionalization and the voices of young people are respected in the development of their own mental, emotional, and physical well-being. And we tend to focus on the abuse that is taking place in the troubled teen industry, or TTI, as we say for short.
There's been a lot of content that's come out on this platform surrounding the troubled teen industry. But for those people who might just be finding this podcast for the first time or who might not have listened to those specific episodes, is there a way you can summarize what the TTI is?
Yeah, so the TTI is really a network of underregulated and powerful congregate care facilities that claim to reform youth struggling with mental health or educational challenges, but they use tough love and other non-evidence-based interventions. So there's a lot of programs that fall under this umbrella, but it's pretty much considered to be therapeutic boarding schools, behavior modification programs, even some foster care facilities, residential treatment centers, boot camps, conversion camps, you name it. So they go by a lot of different names, but one thing remains the same is that they use deceptive marketing to present themselves to desperate parents, therapists, state and judicial agencies as treatment providers for basically any problem that you could think of. And when you break it down, these problems that they're labeling teenagers to have are actually normal teenage behaviors. So we find that this industry has really pathologized adolescence in general. And that's another part of what Unsilenced does, is really trying to strip that away and re-educate the decision makers.
This is a major thing that is happening across states in America. I know that it's more prevalent in some states than others because the regulations change from state to state. It is also something that happens internationally, though. There are recognized troubled teen facilities and programs around the world.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to chumbacasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at chumbacasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, there certainly is. There used to be a lot more. Back when WASP programs were open, they were pretty notorious for going outside of the United States and kind of getting around any kind of regulations. There were several in Mexico, Samoa, that were actually shut down by those authorities. But as far as in Europe and in those areas, I'm not as familiar with them. I do know that they exist. I've just never seen them exist at the same capacity that they do here. And if you look at the private equity that tends to back this industry within the United States, I'm not seeing a ton over in Europe or UK or anywhere really over there anymore. They do, however, have boarding schools. And boarding schools have been a part of the tradition for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? And there's a big difference, I have to point out, between a standard boarding school and if I say boarding school today. So when I'm talking about boarding schools and my own experiences, this is, quote, therapeutic boarding school. So this is not just school. This is also trying to fix you or to change certain parts of your personality or to somehow help you. And I say that in quotes, very, very big quotes. But normal boarding schools can be fine a lot of times, right? And kids spend, the entire school year there. But the big part of that is that they're not controlling the contact with the outside world. You have availability to use a phone. There aren't therapists. And when there's therapists, there has to be heavy oversight, right? So there's a lot of differences. Therapeutic boarding schools use behavior modification, and boarding schools is solely academics. So I want to separate that out as well.
It's an interesting thing you've said there, because I'm not sure that we've ever drawn this distinction between the two. I think that there can absolutely be cult-like aspects in boarding schools in the universal term boarding schools, in terms of hazing, student hazing,
Yes.
cliques, there's still perhaps that element of isolation that can happen in boarding schools. But what you said about the academics, that's one of the key differences, isn't it? Because therapeutic boarding schools typically don't really, from what we've heard from testimonies, really care that much about the academic side of education.
Yep, exactly. It is ironic because if you look at the, quote, therapeutic boarding schools within the United States, many of them are not even accredited. So how can you consider yourself an academy or a boarding school if you don't have high-end education with accredited teachers with graduate degrees? And that's kind of that terminology, when used, is kind of expected to have that level of degrees for teachers and prep work for college, if that makes sense. So they're really using a term that isn't regulated over here, which should be, I'm sure, to use the word academy or boarding school when it's literally just boarding. It's not boarding school. So
Over in England, when we say the term boarding school, it's so interesting I say we, because I just realized there's us and thems all over the place in everything in life. When I say boarding school, to me that makes me think of beautiful grand architecture and really expensive tuition and elitist education, like Cambridge and Oxford, and
right.
schools. When you go to certain boarding schools, it might be an expectation that you would then go on to a place like Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge.
Right.
If you go to a therapeutic boarding school, you're probably not even going to be able to go to college, just a kind of run-of-the-mill college, because a lot of people leave those programs without a GED.
Yeah, GED is what we usually say. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the programs say you think that you're getting your diploma, you think you're on track, and then you receive a diploma, and then you end up going home and trying to get to college, and you're like, oh wait, it's not worth anything. So that's happened to quite a few survivors, which is really unfortunate. But actually, one of the first things that ended helping me like wake up back when I woke up to the abuse that I went through when I was a kid is putting in boarding school, and then putting after it, life sucks now in like boarding school, still have trouble or things like that. And a lot of the rabbit hole that I ended up in was boarding schools in the UK. And actually there is research to show something called that they've named boarding school syndrome. And that is from actual boarding schools. This is just boarding schools. This is not TTI. And so we're also seeing historically being at boarding schools can have a detrimental effect. And that is something we're highlighting within the TTI too, is the importance of being around family and having that familial unit. We know now through research that having close familial ties when you're an adolescent can actually lower levels of depression until your late 30s. So we're seeing a very high correlation between community involvement and familial involvement and long-term happiness, right? So it's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because that's where I started before I even knew a TTI existed. I heard about boarding school syndrome, and I'm texting my friends from my therapeutic boarding school going, oh my gosh, do we have this?
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
I suppose what you said about misleading terminology and skewed sales pitches that are given to families in distress who are really looking for any kind of support that they can get to help their struggling child or struggling family unit. When you think of the term boarding school, you might think of, beautiful British cinematography like Notting Hill. And that is what some of the therapeutic boarding schools in America look like, the beautiful mansions and estate buildings. But again, as you've just explained, it's not really what is happening in those schools. There's so much more. And it's worrying that there's a recognized thing called boarding school syndrome that's not even taken into account everything else that happens in these non-regulated therapeutic boarding schools that take inspiration from actual destructive cults where people have died,
Right.
and now children are dying. So this work is incredibly, incredibly important. And I guess that we learn about how you ended up doing this advocacy work by hearing your personal story. So I would like to ask you if it's okay to talk about what your life was like before you were introduced to the TTI.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Newport Beach, California, in Southern California, and I found myself very confused, I guess. I felt like I never really fit in. And part of that was because I was adopted at birth. So, and it's nothing against my family. It's more just kind of inborn. When you're adopted, you just feel a little bit different than everyone else. You don't look like your family. You don't, you just don't feel like everyone else. And it can have a pretty detrimental effect. And it kind of carried over into friendships. So I had trouble making friends. I had trouble keeping friends and kind of finding my place in society, even at a young age. And the one of the other ways that that manifested itself was really trying different things to see if this is who I am. So part of the ways that I did that was trying to smoke pot, started to get more interested in boys, see if I could get attention in that way, you know, just trying different ways to see, does this fit my personality? And also, one of the other aspects that made it difficult and kind of caused everything to come to a head is I also have ADHD. And at the time, I had undiagnosed autism, and I was only diagnosed about 8 months ago with autism. So that was something doctors didn't know. And they always kind of thought that ADHD didn't cover everything. And so it's interesting to look back. But so because of that, I found myself moving from school to school. None of the schools really fit. Either it was a lot of bullying. I got bullied very heavily when I was a kid. And so it was either bullying or too big of a school, not enough class sizes, couldn't help me enough in math where I struggled. So I just kept moving schools. So that caused me to not make as many long-term friends. And so it got to a point where I went to a public high school, and I ended up in the Newport Harbor High School. And in the first semester, I made a really good friend, and we snuck off campus one day to get this guy to buy us beer. And this guy who bought us beer subsequently ended up drugging us and sexually assaulting us at a nearby park. And so we basically were like, oh crap, we're going to get in a lot of trouble. We're going to try to keep it silent. But then the school ended up finding out about the sexual assault and about the fact we drank during school hours. And regardless of us being sexually assaulted, because of the zero tolerance policy, they expelled us, which I find to be just like absolutely disgustingly wrong. But that ended up being the straw that broke the camel's back with my parents. And so from my parents' point of view, here's this kid that's really struggling, tends to or appears to have anxiety, appears to have problems with her peers. And so they hired what we call an educational consultant. And then the educational consultant also worked with my psychologist and my neuropsychiatrist at the time. And they all decided that this was the right thing to do, to send me to these places. So let's see, I was 15 in, I think it was the end of January. And I was woken up in the middle of the night by two strangers that told me that I'm coming with them and we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And I obviously chose the easy way. And they made me change in front of them. They made me go to the bathroom in front of them. And then they threw me back in the back of an SUV and drove me to LAX airport. And I wasn't allowed to know where I was going. I had to like sit the other direction at the gate, couldn't see the ticket. So I didn't find out where I was flying to until the captain came on the plane and said, we're going to Boise, Idaho. We landed in Boise and we arrived at Intermountain Hospital. And I remember just pulling up to that, realizing, oh my God, my childhood is over. Like everything I thought was normal isn't. And there's this huge world I didn't know existed. And I remember being so scared. And, it was a lockdown facility. So there's magnetic locks that make loud noises before it opens and it slams behind you. They take all of your stuff. They search all of it. They take your shoes. I couldn't have shoelaces for like 5 days. They didn't want me to hang myself. Like I couldn't have a pencil because I could self-harm. I had to write home my first letter in crayon because I wasn't trusted to be with a pencil. So this place was extreme. And I don't say that as an abuse victim. I say that as honestly, a professional looking back and seeing what I was struggling with and the things that kids are in that facility are struggling with. I should not have been there. And funny enough, that's what I was saying as a 15-year-old. You've made a mistake. I'm not supposed to be here. I knew at that age that I did not fit in. Many of these children in this facility needed legitimate psychiatric care. And it was so frightening as a child that I didn't grow up in an abusive household. I never saw abuse. I never saw like screaming or tantrums or anything scary like that. And I saw restraints every single week, mechanical, chemical, kids screaming in the QR, which is a quiet room, a padded room with a table in the middle with straps. And they would lock it from the nurse's station. And you'd see this little window of a kid's face screaming with like this, the lines through the glass, the shatterproof glass. It would just be this kid's face screaming. Over medication. They diagnosed me as bipolar the second day I was there, and they loaded me with antipsychotics and things like that. And so honestly, 6 months of my life, I completely disassociated from everything. And I ended up gaining 60 pounds from over medication, lack of healthy food, lack of exercise, and honestly, just toxic stress. And I thought I was going to go home. However, I ended up finding out a couple days before I left that I was going to be going to a quote therapeutic boarding school up in northern Montana. So I ended up, thank God, having a week with my parents at our family cottage in Wisconsin. And then I headed up to Chrysalis, which is the second place that I went to. And that place was much different. It was not a lockdown. You live with your two therapists who are a married couple in the middle of nowhere in a log cabin, and you share a house with 10 girls and Mary and Kenny, the owners. And like for the first 6 months, I was on the upstairs, which is next to Mary and Kenny's bedroom. So I lived in a room next to my therapist, and I shared a bathroom with my therapist for this first 6 months. So definitely a unique experience. And they make us call each other the Chrysalis sisters, and we're all a Chrysalis family. And they talk about the values. They're called Chrysalis values. And everything is basically revolving around what they want us to be, what they think we should be, and systematically breaking us down until we reach like learned helplessness, in my opinion, so that they can build us back up in the image they think that we should be. And so that was very much so, in my eyes, the most cult experience that I ever had. I honestly kind of think about it as having been in a cult because it took so long to wake up. I ended up spending 3 years there. And
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
I didn't wake up to the abuse and didn't begin to see it as abuse until I was 33, when one of my Chrysalis sisters committed suicide. And that really caused me to take a look at what had happened. And all of a sudden the narrative shifted. And I was like, oh crap. I was abused for 3.5 years when I was younger. And ever since then, it's kind of just been a a slow wake up period. Every couple months, I'll wake up to something else, some other aspect that happened that I had repressed. And so, yeah, Chrysalis it's one of those ones you're talking about, right? It's amazingly beautiful. We have horses, we have green grass, a garden, and beautiful facilities. But they don't tell you that we are maintaining the facilities, we are mowing the grass, we are taking care of the horses, we are chopping wood, we are doing everything, we are cooking every single meal. So lots of forced labor. And then one of the other things that stands out about Chrysalis was what they call circle time. And circle was their form of group therapy. And if you know anything about Synanon, it is the exact same thing of the game. So we would have to sit in a circle and someone would be in the hot seat and we'd hear all these negative things about us. And then you'd hear echoes around the room and everyone is going in circles telling you what's wrong with you until you're crying, but then you can't cry because it's defensive. So that was probably one of the most abusive things in my opinion, looking back, just because it created such a negative self-image, right? And a negative view of who I am, because I was told so constantly, like, you're an idiot, you're not good enough, you're the reason that you're here, no one else, you're responsible for every single bad thing that ever happened to you, and you need to take accountability for every single bad thing that happened to you. Doesn't matter if it was my fault or not, everything is my fault. So getting sexually assaulted, that's my fault. That's something I could have done to prevent that, right? So everything is based off of you and everything's in your control. And yeah, which made going directly to college very interesting, because that's not how the world works. So
I feel like you must have told this story a few times.
Just a few.
At this point, it was very thorough and detailed, but also very concise. So thank you for sharing that with us, Meg.
Yeah.
I had a few thoughts whilst you were going through your journey. I don't know that. I mean, now it's easy to we can't live in hypotheticals, and it's so easy to say things in hindsight. But trying marijuana, drinking alcohol, skipping school, I feel like this is pretty typical teenage behavior.
It is. It's very typical.
And I don't think that, of course, it's parents have these nightmares of their children skipping school, asking for people to get them alcohol, and something absolutely terrible happens to them. It doesn't 90% of the time happen. It's so awful that it's just, what are the chances of that happening? And then the response that the school had, completely inappropriate, the completely the wrong response. And who knows where your educational journey would have gone if the school would have supported you in the right way and helped you perhaps seek legal action instead of saying, oh, sorry, we don't tolerate drinking.
Right.
There's so much wrong with that situation. And then for your parents to be told that by everybody, all of the professional bodies, everybody involved in trying to help you as an individual, your educational consultant, your psychologist, the best thing for Meg is for her to go to this hospital, to be kidnapped in the middle of the night like a murder, like a serial killer suspect. You're taken, nobody talks to you. You're forced to get changed in front of people. It's not like you are such a bad drug addict that you're at risk of overdosing every time you're on your own, or of trying to smuggle really strong narcotics anywhere with you that you happen to travel. But that's how you're being treated, like you're stashing weapons on yourself. And then you're transported to a hospital. The one that you've described sounds similar to one that I worked on that was for sectioned patients with complex schizophrenia, and they were all over the age of 7. They were all over the age of 70, so they were like a risk to themselves, each other, and everybody else. and you had to have like 3 different professionals sign them out of the building if you wanted to take a walk around the garden. You're a child who's tried a bit of alcohol and smoked a bit of pot. It's wild. It's not no troubled teen facility would have been appropriate for you, I don't think. How many times do you hear this story of children who are just pushing boundaries and experimenting and exploring with things that I think are quite typical for teenagers?
I mean, I'd say that that's the norm. I I have to say that I do hear stories of people who tell their story and they're not in the norm, right? They were extremely out of control and they know it, right? We do see cases like that. However, I would say the vast majority of survivors were doing very, very normal things. And when I say normal, I don't want to discount how scary it can be as a parent, right? I myself have 4 children, and especially since having children, it's really kind of kicked in just how my parents felt, right? My oldest daughter is 12. And so, it's getting to the stage where it's really, really hard, like really, really hard. I'm not going to lie. And it is scary. And so, just because things are normal doesn't mean they aren't confusing and aren't scary. And the way that I think about it and the way that I explain it to people to help them understand the kind of pressure that parents are under and my parents were under is, as a mom, if you take your daughter or son to the emergency room and they have severe stomach pain and they're crying and you're scared and you go into the ER, a doctor comes in and takes one look at them and touches their belly for a couple seconds and says, they need surgery right now or they're going to die. What do you do? Do you follow what they say? Or do you go home and do Google searches and try to see alternative methods that could possibly work, but it'll take 3 times the amount of time and you're not a expert, so it might not work. So this is kind of the pressure that parents are feeling, is they are being told that these behaviors are going to lead to teenage pregnancy, to truancy, to being homeless, to bad decisions in their minds. And are they're forced with a decision by a professional, quote, professional, that claims, are you ready to make an investment into your kid's future so that they don't end up dead? What do you do? Do you risk it and go against that, quote, professional? Or do you do what you can as a mom or a dad and try to make the best call? And so that's what I kind of always give to people, to manufacture that pressure. And medical emergencies kind of are able to do that.
I suppose at this point as well, there is some confirmation bias that can be used because of the experiences that you've had with this individual that has assaulted you and your friends. 9 times out of 10, I don't think that would happen. I myself have probably asked a stranger outside the shop to buy me a bottle of cheap cider, to go drink in the park. And I'm really, really sorry that happened to you, Meg. I don't know if you were ever able to take legal action against the individual.
So this is I always leave this part out because it's just so messed up and so kind of long-winded. But in short, what happened is we were not going to tell anyone anything. And we decided on the walk back after it happened that if the school finds out, we're going to tell them about the sexual assault, but we're going to tell them, because we don't want to be in trouble for leaving school, that he made us leave school and he forced us to drink, because we were so scared to get in trouble for that. So when the school found out, that was what we said, and they took it seriously. They called the FBI. The FBI came in. They literally sat us down. We had to go to like a special center with that one-way mirror thing where people are watching me, and I had to say what happened with 2 different bears, and it was a big deal. And they even collected evidence. They found the guy. He was staying in a motel. It was really, really bad. But what happened was, one day I went to school and my friend told the truth about what happened. and that he didn't make us leave campus. And then the FBI didn't believe us, and they thought we made up the entire thing. So we really kind of messed that up, obviously. But it's just like we ruined our own credibility because we're so scared of the school.
And rightly so, after the response that they had to the entire thing. You mentioned that the hospital was based in Idaho, and a lot of the troubled teen programs that I've come across through speaking to people on the podcast have some type of religious affiliation. So I wanted to ask whether you know of any ties to the Mormon faith that this hospital in Idaho might have.
It's possible. It's possible. I believe at the time, Intermountain was owned by CRC Health at the time, I believe. But most of the ties to Mormonism would probably be more so in Utah. And in Utah, that's where you see just the largest amount of I can't even explain it. It's really, really incestuous, I have to say. So if someone dies at a facility, sometimes they don't even lose their license, or they go on conditional status and then it gives back. And there's really a ton of programs in Utah. It's a big receiving state, as we call them. So there's states like California that are big send out states, and there's a lot of receiving states like Utah. But there's definitely a strong link that we have found between Mormonism and the ties to the industry. And partly because if you trace the TTI history back, we all know that the troubled teen industry started from a cult called Synanon, and also from other foundations like Roloff and the religious foundations, things like that. But Wilderness actually is rooted in Mormonism. It was a person from BYU who started a wilderness course as part of the college, and then that started Challenger Foundation, and every single wilderness today is actually a descendant of Challenger Foundation, which had Mormonism ties. So even if it doesn't have clear ties, such as a religious affiliation within the handbook and the policy and procedures, you'll notice that when you look at the program director and the program staff, they possibly went to BYU, and you'll see a large amount of staff coming from BYU. So even if it isn't technically part of the program, the people running the program have firm beliefs in this religion. So you are seeing a higher rate of conversion therapy where they try to pray away the gay, a lot of shame-based activities. For instance, if you are trans, they'll make you dress as the opposite sex to convince you you're not, those kinds of things. And in my opinion, the Mormonism tie doesn't help with that, because they are very strict, as we know, in what they believe and what they accept to be okay and what they accept to be not okay. And so when you have a facility being run by that mentality, as you can imagine, there's not a lot of acceptance.
That is the end of part 1 of this mini-series on the troubled teen industry. For more information on Meg's work or to find support, please visit the links in the episode description. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault Podcast.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No